Well, the climate change mafia strikes again. Of course, we've been talking about the asinine COP28 climate summit in Dubai this week, and we all know this doomsday climate cult is nothing more than a way to cripple the U.S. and the Western world, which is probably why China and Russia seem to be supportive of our transition away from reliable energy sources to wind, solar, and electricity. Now, speaking of energy, representatives from about 200 different countries agreed to a deal at the summit to start moving away from fossil fuels and to start gradually using other sources of fuel. Following 2 weeks of extremely intense negotiations, the deal came together as a supposed way to lower greenhouse gas emissions globally in order to address the purported climate crisis. But then again, it's more of a manufactured crisis in order to concentrate power for the elites. So the U.S. ought to fight back against this deal with every fiber of its being. The president of the COP28 summit, Sultan Al Jaber of the United Arab Emirates, has praised the deal as being historic while also saying it's not a success until it's implemented across the globe. Now, all of this central planning regarding energy, among other things, might sound like a move right out of Joseph Stalin's Soviet-style playbook. And, well, that's because it is, as friend of the show Mark Morano recently put it. Interestingly enough, though, is the fact that these discussions took place in the Middle East because the region is rife with OPEC countries, whose governments have gotten rich on the production and sale of petroleum. Meanwhile, the world's biggest polluters, such as China, India, and Russia, don't seem to be interested in giving up traditional fuel sources like coal and oil, given how important it is to their respective economies. But alas, the UN's Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change seeks to lower greenhouse gas emissions by more than 40% by the year 2030, which sounds like an impossible mission to me. With all of this said, it's important to talk about the real agenda hidden behind liberal PDs and platitudes about saving the planet from humanity, as if human beings are nothing more than a drain on the planet's precious resources. And what happens if we don't stop using fossil fuels? Well, according to the globalists at the UN, we'll face all sorts of disastrous consequences, ranging from famine to extreme and uncontrollable weather events. Although that's funny because I thought climate and weather were different. That's what the experts say, or used to say at least. And we should always listen to the so-called climate experts and their doomsday predictions, none of which have ever come true. Back in the 1960s, they said we would run out of oil in 10 years, but here we are today with more than enough oil to go around. So what was the real purpose of this COP28 summit? Is this just a distraction away from current events? Or is this truly a Soviet-style power play designed to usher in the New World Order where we all own nothing and where the state owns everything? I guess it's true what they say. Welcome to climate change, where the weather is America's fault and the only solution is more communism. Alex Newman joins me now to discuss, CEO of Liberty Sentinel Media.
Hey, Alison, brilliant. The solution to all of these problems is always communism.
Yes, Alex, I think that pretty much sums it up well. And, I really love what our mutual friend Mark Morano said. And I want to dive deeper into his statement. And that is, this is Soviet-style central planning that simply must be stopped. He then went on to say all Republicans from the leaders on down need to get to work stopping this anti-human agenda. And I totally agree. I actually talked about this with him briefly on the show yesterday. But I'd even go a step further. When you understand that the entire green agenda is nothing more than a last days doctrine of demons religion, a la Romans 1:25, where the creation is worshipped rather than the creator, you sort of begin to understand there can be no compromise with the globalist agenda. What are your thoughts, Alex?
That's exactly right, Alison. And the moment Republicans give an inch and say, well, maybe CO2 really is a problem, maybe the gas we exhale really is a toxic pollution, and maybe letting the United Nations handle this is intelligent or even acceptable, we're doomed, right? The chaos and the crisis really begins. So what's happening here, you're absolutely right. There is a very religious element to it. In fact, they had the first ever faith pavilion at this UN COP28. And the Pope was actually supposed to be there to inaugurate it. He ended up getting sick and having to send his Secretary of State to do it. But they're even trying to reframe the concept of sin. In the Pope's speech inaugurating this booth, he said that we need to understand that hurting the environment is an offense against God. And of course, they're starting from the assumption that CO2, the gas of life, the gas we exhale, is hurting the environment. It's pollution. So as I see it, the real agenda here, and when they talk about phasing out fossil fuels, they talk about phasing out hydrocarbon energy, everybody at these summits with a brain, and I just got back yesterday, understands that that's not going to happen. The only thing that they're phasing out here is the Western world, what used to be known as Christendom or the free world, and they're paving the way for a transition toward what they themselves call the new multipolar world order. Now, Klaus Schwab, the head of the World Economic Forum, told us communist China is the model, right? David Rockefeller in the 1970s wrote in the New York Times that communist China, their social experiment under the leadership of Chairman Mao, was the most successful and important in all of human history. Justin Trudeau, the wannabe dictator of Canada, told us recently the government he most admires is the one in communist China. So they're all telling you that this new world order is going to be based on the communist Chinese model. Totalitarianism, fascism, technocracy, communism, all rolled up into one horror show. We need to understand they're building coal-fired power plants faster than anybody could count them. I asked multiple U.S. senators at this conference about that. They said, well, we just had to beg the communist Chinese to jump over the cliff after us. I mean, give me a break. What's happening here is a transfer of power, an elimination of freedom, nothing to do whatsoever with the climate.
Yeah, absolutely. And not only that, but it appears this agreement, no surprise, has no teeth for heavier polluters like China, Russia, and Arab states to comply and reduce their reliance on traditional energy sources. I mean, is that accurate, Alex? Is that the takeaway here?
That's exactly accurate, and they all know it, right? I mean, they were actually exposed doing oil and gas deals at the summit. The summit was run by the head of the Abu Dhabi National Oil Corporation, the state-owned oil and gas company of the United Arab Emirates. And leaked documents showed they were actually doing oil and gas deals with the communist Chinese, while at the same time everybody's telling America we need to stop using energy. But if you look at the proposals and the pledges that the Biden administration made, really incisive analysis by Stephen Moore, this would result, if they're implemented, in the decimation of more than 60% of the electrical power generating capacity of the United States of America. Our nation will not survive that. Already, our factories, our jobs, our manufacturing are going over to communist China. They have cheaper energy prices. They have less insane regulation. And so this is actually the phase out of the United States, the phase out of the Western Christian civilization model, and this move toward a new system. But you're absolutely right. None of the Arab or the communist or the socialist regimes at this UN summit have even the slightest intention of ending their reliance on hydrocarbon energy. It's only for the suckers in the United States, Europe, Japan, South Korea, and the other formerly free nations.
Unbelievable. This is completely unsustainable, and it is shocking to me that more people, especially our, so-called leaders, aren't talking about this more. Very concerning. Now, another outrageous clause of the agreement would in effect be a massive global welfare scheme where rich nations would subsidize the so-called green transition of poorer countries. Oh, and wait up, this will be voluntary too. So lo and behold, this will be sort of a secondary vehicle for the West to give away its cash and ultimately fast track our economic suicide. I mean, do you see it any differently, Alex?
That's a perfect way to put it. This is economic suicide by the formerly free nations of the West. And what they are talking about here, they've got multiple schemes now to extract the wealth of what's left of the middle class, even as they decimate the middle class. So at this one, at the COP28, they operationalized, as they call it, the so-called loss and damage fund. So the last one, John Kerry, Joe Biden pled guilty on behalf of the United States for our alleged climate sins. Apparently every storm, every drought, every weather incident in the third world is our fault for having developed basically every invention you can think of that makes life possible, productive, and tolerable on this planet. So now we have to pay them for this. So they're going to be looting what's left of our middle class. And really, I mean what's left of it. It's rapidly being destroyed. And they're going to be taking that money and handing it over to third world kleptocrats under the guise of what they themselves are calling climate reparations. Then you've got the Green Climate Slush Fund. Biden pledged another $3 billion for this atrocity. Flagrant defiance of federal law, which prohibits any money to any international organization that admits the state of Palestine as a member. And so total defiance of federal law. They're shoving our money, no appropriations by Congress, shoving our money into this fund. Think of it like a bribery scheme, right? They need this money to get the third world kleptocrats on board with the agenda. That's what they're doing. It's global wealth redistribution, deindustrialization of the West, and the elimination of freedom.
And if that didn't sound bad, there's actually more. Alex, the U.S. and Western governments are pledging hundreds of millions for a new loss and damage fund and will serve to become a sort of global reparations vehicle administered by, you guessed it, the World Bank. Alex, there's no way you could ever foresee this being used as a ploy to quickly usher in an IMF, World Bank-controlled CBDC digital ID matrix, could you?
It's exactly what they're doing, Alison. That's exactly what they're doing. One of the first things I saw when I got off the airplane in Dubai was these big ads by MasterCard talking about you now have a personal carbon tracker so you can keep track of your carbon footprint. CNN was proposing a carbon passport, so you won't be able to travel once you exceed your carbon budget, your carbon footprint. So this is all coming in very rapidly. You also had the UN Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change say that now they don't want to just do the science. They now want to prescribe the policies and implement the policies. So on every front now, they're coming after us, even on the religious front, right? So they're trying to redesign and redefine morality so that your sin is not, murder, hate, covetousness, stealing, etc. Your sin is now your carbon emissions, your steak dinner, your travel with your family, whatever it is, your heating or your air conditioning. Totally new system of morality, and you work to pay off your sin, your debt, by buying carbon credits from Al Gore, by uprooting African villages and having them plant trees there instead. They're destroying our businesses, destroying our food systems. Everything about this, Alison, is an attack on humanity. It's an attack on freedom, and it's an attack especially on the people of the United States of America, and particularly what's left of our middle class.
Well said, Alex. I think that summarizes it beautifully. It's all just so maddening and should infuriate every single viewer watching this broadcast. Alex, we're out of time for today, but thank you so much for joining in and explaining all of that. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Alison.
Take care.
For all our viewers asking where One America News is heading in the future, we would like to introduce you to OAN Live. OAN Live is the best way to stay up to date on all of the hard-hitting, straight-shooting, national and international headlines. And the best part is, OAN Live is only $4.99 per month. All the credible, honest, unbiased reporting One America News offers at a fraction of the cost of cable. Just go to OANN.com to easily sign up for OAN Live and stay informed.